All right, everybody, welcome. Steve Tarter, and this is another edition of Tarter Sauce, our podcast here at the Peoria Journal-Star, at the Palatial Studios here. With me today, Brent Baker. Brent, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having
Thanks for coming in on a short week, or it's Thanksgiving week, so we call it short. But Brent, you've got a couple of different titles. I just found out, corrected your latest, Greater Peoria Pathways Co-Director.
me. Correct.
With the Greater Peoria Economic Development Council.
Yep.
Say that 3 times fast.
No.
Then we test later. And you're also president of Bike Peoria.
Yep. Current president.
So 2 different things, but something to talk about. How long have you been at EDC?
I've been with the Greater Peoria EDC for just over 2 years now. So I'm in my 3rd year at the EDC.
And, obviously we've those people that read the paper or watch TV news and stuff know there's been lots of activity with economic development here in Peoria area. What's your little focus?
My focus, it's a good question. My role started a bit differently. It was a bit more unique in its inception at the EDC. So this originally started with an initiative focused specifically on Peoria Public Schools. Led by Mayor Artis.
That.
Yeah, so Mayor Artis was really integral in pulling together a number of stakeholders here in Peoria, including the Peoria Public Schools, the Peoria Federation of Teachers, the EDC, the Chamber, the CEO Council, Illinois Central College, and a couple of the other educational institutions. So something called an organization called Perfect, which is an education for employment office. They handle some CTE funds, and the Regional Office of Education. So really pulling some folks together and talking about how can we improve what we call career development outcomes for Peoria Public School students, and really helping students at the high school level explore careers that are here in our area where they could be successful in after high school, and drive more informed post-secondary decisions. Because I struggled with my sort of decision making and finding my career, stumbling through college, and it's just not a viable model.
So there's 2 things there. There's one, get a job right after high school, and another one, find your way through the educational system, depending on
yes,
whether it's ICC Bradley or whatever it is.
Yes and no. So I think that's one of the main points that as we've gotten into the work, trying to address, right, and even trying to rethink how we've historically thought about economic development, right? You think about economic development, and back in the 80s and 90s, it was what they called chasing smokestacks, trying to land these sort of big wins, factories and companies, large job producers.
Sure.
Economic development is shifting, and it's shifting to build better systems, to connect currently available talent in the community with the careers that are here and the careers that we'll need in the future. So it's shifting and trying to figure out how we grow small business and then grow the talent that's here as well locally.
So what is all right, and I'm sure it's many different things, but what are you likely to be doing in any given day? Are you hitting the schools up? Are you talking to employers? Probably all of the above. Give us some idea of what you do.
Sure. So it's again, a bit unique. What I was brought on to do was, again, focused on Peoria Public Schools in its initial functionality. I might also add that this work for its lifetime, going into year 3, has been funded by the American Federation of Teachers. So the Teachers Union has a private grant-making arm called the Innovation Fund, and they've supported all 3 years of this work, which is fantastic. So we were only anticipating 2. They surprised us with a 3rd year, which is
what happens then?
Pretty cool.
After 3?
The EDC will retain my role.
Okay.
There's been an interest in that. So
good.
That's good news for me.
Yeah.
So my
Always
role,
good news. Yeah.
my role began with really when we start talking about those career development outcomes, it was kind of 2-pronged. So how do we get students interacting with careers in the classroom, in the schools, build, again, that system of how are students interacting with careers of interest 9 through 12? And then also on the flip side of that, how are we getting them out of the classroom and actually giving them a ground level view of some of these careers? So that work has taken place. And how do we build a system where employers are interested and willingly create internships, job shadowing opportunities, putting that all in an open access system where students can go on and connect with those and getting them connected with those internships. So two prongs. So I've worked very closely with ICC on working to help sequence and build more intentional career pathways. So when a student comes in ninth grade, and for instance, say they're interested in health sciences, they know what courses they can engage with 9 through 12 and what other supporting activities.
So
they
you're
can
probably
involve
working
with.
pretty closely with counseling and guidance offices and things of that sort,
Yeah,
right?
so there's counselors involved, but also the upper level administration when you get into the curriculum directors and things like that. But I've kind of been largely hands off. I'm not a content expert in curriculum, but
Right.
really trying to help facilitate those connections and be in the room and help maybe come at it at a different perspective and help support however I can.
Well, if I remember rightly, Brent, we're talking with Brent Baker from EDC, and that's Economic Development Council in this greater Peoria area. What what are you getting back from the businesses? You're obviously contacting a lot of them
Yes, sir.
to give them this information you just gave us. So what's the feedback?
It's tough. It's a challenge.
It is a challenge.
It's a challenge to get. Well, first, it's outlining the problem, right? So, a lot of employers, industry leaders in this area, we hear one thing that nobody can find qualified workforce, or it's
Right.
really challenging to
Hear that a
find
lot.
qualified people to do your jobs. And getting back to your point of, is it career college? And that's a kind of a false dichotomy. And it's really most of the jobs, the vast majority of jobs on the horizon will require some level of post-secondary. It doesn't matter if it's a 4-year, it could be a 2-year, it could be a certificate. So now we're talking scalable, and how do we get students in earlier, expose them to careers, get them in an entry level, and maybe do some training either internally. A lot of these leaders in the healthcare space and manufacturing, they're really interested in how they can grow their own. So once they're in there, they have systems where they can get people to where they need to be and where they want them to
Right.
be. But it's getting them to think differently about how they're recruiting workforce. So it's
Getting the employers.
correct. So it's a business case, right? So how much are you investing in recruiting for talent that's maybe out of the area? What if you could redirect some of those resources to actually providing opportunities for 16 and 18-year-olds to maybe get a foot in the door and experience a career, and maybe that could be your potential employee 3 or 4 years down the road. And trying to do that, it's strategic workforce development as opposed to doing that sort of after the fact and trying to figure and find people from outside the region.
Yeah, I would think that would be, and again, you're talking about big companies, Caterpillar, big hospitals, right down to the smaller tech firm that might only have a handful of employees.
Correct.
And both of which could help.
And we've seen success in both. So I'll share a couple stories. In our first year with Peoria Pathways, it was largely testing fences, as I like to refer to it, and building relationships and finding solutions to those pain points and figuring out how we can start building some of these systems or what the challenges were in addressing those. Year 2, we were successful in getting about 70 students in internships between 18 different companies, ranging from Beechler's auto and vehicle
Paid
care.
internships?
Paid internships,
Okay.
yes. All the way up to Caterpillar and your Unity points and your OSFs. So we had the range of opportunities. And so again, that there's unique challenges for both environments with the small business and the large corporate
If
institutions.
a company wants an intern, they call you?
That's one way to do it. Yeah, they can reach out to me. We also host regular employer informational sessions every month where open invite, you can come and learn about the different internship models that are out there and kind of think through what are some of those entry points and how to start building that. But I'm here as a resource to share those best practices and be able to support that, but really help provide the rough framework for what an internship looks like and how they connect with students and what that system looks like. So I'm usually the entry point, but by no means am I alone in this work. We have partners at the chamber, a couple other chambers as we look to scale regionally. So we're working to grow that network of practitioners that I can help empower to share with business and their colleagues.
No, it's tough when you're the one guy on the front line. I mean, I know you have somebody at ICC. You were saying Dr. Margaret Swanson at ICC. Is also a co-director with you. But, you're out there on the front lines talking to business. They may, well, yeah, we think we know what it is. Yeah. And then you know, you don't see them again for 20, you know, for 6 months to a year. I mean, that's got to be tough, right? I mean,
Sure.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
so how do you get around that? How do you hammer this point home?
Persistence.
Very good.
You're exactly right. So from first touch with an employer, it takes anywhere, the shortest turnaround for an internship that we've had from first contact with employer to actually getting a student in was about 7 weeks. So a month and a half.
Okay.
However, I've also been in communication with some employer partners for over a year, when just following up and saying, hey, still interested in seeing how we can support this or connect some students. So it's really persistence. I send maybe 20 or 30 follow-up emails a week and make some phone calls. So
Sure.
Persistence. But what we found is that largely the concern is on the front end. And it's really thinking about how to engage with a younger individual can be challenging. And the question's always what value can they add to our team? What skills are they bringing to the table?
Right.
I don't want a liability. I don't want to have to be looking over somebody's shoulder. But what we found is if you build an intentional program, and if you have it outlined of if it's project specific and if they have certain tasks and they can see how it fits in, then once you get the students in there, they're usually self-starters and they can go right to task, and they recognize being treated as an adult and given responsibilities as opposed to working in what we consider a typical retail environment. But if they're given a chance to intern at a hospital for $10 an hour, that's a pretty cool thing.
Yeah.
And they respond positively to that. And we've seen in our first cohort of those 70 interns, we've seen about 10% or about 7 students actually retain at the place of internship to be an actual employee.
What age are these kids?
Between 16 and 18.
Okay.
Originally, when we started doing this, we anticipated employers would want the older students.
Right.
Some employers need 18-year-olds by virtue of some regulation and policy. However, what we found is that after the first year of having interns, some of our larger partners, including the hospitals, said, we want juniors. We want students that are 16 and a half, 17, because that gives us more time with them.
Yeah.
And we can actually, if they're interested, exactly right, because they're coming at it again as that strategic investment, saying, if we spend money on these folks, we want the ability to be able to keep them.
Sure.
And we're seeing that, and it's a nice proof of concept. So as we look forward, we look to growing that. So for instance, Unity Point's internship program began with one conversation. It took about a year to stand the program up, but that being said, they got 8 interns in their first cohort. Very successfully, they retained, I believe, 3 of the students after their internships. And then this year, in a couple weeks, they'll be opening up the application window for their second cohort, and that'll be 20 students paid forward out of their human resources budget.
Wow.
So we're seeing that it makes sense for them, and this is an investment they want to start making.
And these are all young people from the local schools?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
That's
so we've seen some early success, and I think if we can start capitalizing that and marking it and sharing it peer-to-peer, those businesses can onboard other businesses.
I was going to say, if somebody says, hey, we just did this, and then I won't say their competitor, but another business in town might say, well, if they're willing to take that chance or make that effort, maybe I should too. You know,
so that's what we're working on now is using those successes to create other success.
Very good.
Yeah.
Well, I asked you facetiously when you came in, did you ride your bike here today? And of course, yeah, you know, you're a busy guy. You gotta get places on time. But how long have you been riding your bike? Because we're going to talk about your presidency of Bike Peoria.
You know, my story probably isn't unique. I grew up riding a bike. Right, it was one of my favorite
Where'd you
things. I grew up in Brimfield.
Okay.
Between Kickapoo and Brimfield.
Sure.
So I grew up out there, went to Brimfield, grade school and high school, and then live in Peoria now. But I live at the corner of Main and Sheridan, so one of the more walkable districts of Peoria.
Yeah, an area that's seen a lot of change and
positive change. So
positive change.
But I grew up riding a bike. I loved it, and then kind of fell off. You know, I started driving. It was like, this is great. I can drive. And now, you know, you get older and you're like, oh, driving isn't great. It's
back to the
two
wheels.
Right. So a couple years ago, I just wanted to start riding again. So I jumped on Craigslist. I bought a $50 bike. And as you would imagine, a $50 bike does, it started falling apart. But but I loved riding and wanted to continue riding. So I figured I needed to learn how to fix it. And I walked into the Bike Peoria co-op,
which is right there, right near Sheridan, Maine.
Yeah,
isn't it? Right?
about a half block away from where I live now. This is before I lived in the neighborhood. And I walked in, and this was shortly after they opened, unbeknownst to me. They just kind of gotten going. And some of the volunteers helped me fix my bike. You know, it cost me $10 to get it back running again. And I just kind of fell in love with that idea of being able to work alongside somebody and figure out. I'm really good with sort of practical skills and with my hands. So
we'll remember that if we
yeah.
have a problem, because this is the guy to call over here. My chain came off, Brent.
Yeah.
What are we going to do here?
So that was, about, 3.5, 4 years ago now. And after that time fixing my one bike, I bought another bike and kept showing back up at the co-op, working on my own bike. And then I got to a point where I was trusted to hold shop hours. So I started volunteering there and actually had a key to the space and took on some more responsibilities.
You became one of the volunteers that helped you initially.
Yep, exactly right.
How would you describe the bike, in that period of time that you're talking about? We've seen, just us casual observers, not necessarily bike riders. The biking thing has come forward, hasn't it? I mean, in Peoria, I'm sure there's places we could mention around the country where they've been biking with bike trails and everything else for many, many years. We know it's big in overseas, and many more people use it than perhaps here. But how would you describe the bike movement in central Illinois?
That's a good question. I'd say growing and kind of taking on this forward momentum that, to your point, wasn't around even a year and a half ago. But really being able to see people adopt it as a viable way to get around our city. And we've seen that with the question, right, it's always been, do you build the infrastructure and then people come, or do you get the people to start riding and then the infrastructure follows?
Right.
There's always that chicken and the egg, but what we've seen is that you can do both. There's no right answer. But we at Bike Peoria, through the co-op, that's kind of one of our main strategies for education and empowerment, and really creating a community space around cycling that's accessible. But we work with a number of other organizations that represent those different sensibilities of cycling. But altogether, we've seen the city respond to that and understand or begin to acknowledge that there are people who want to explore the city in a different means outside of a vehicle. And so we see that in the new infrastructure coming online. Wisconsin just had sharrows put in up and down, and we contributed along with a bunch of other organizations to the bike master plan that got passed about a year and a half ago. And those are those infrastructure improvements you see happening now. So as the city upgrades the roads, they're actually going to include that infrastructure that was agreed upon in the bike master plan. So I think in the next 3 to 5 years, we're only going to see it increase more. And as more infrastructure comes online, we'll see more people using it. And that's been case in point is the City Cycle program that the CVB has been operating. We just got the first data back, and they've had...
Are these the rental bikes?
Correct, the bike share program.
Around town?
So, again, we're unsure given the topography of our city as well as the interest. There was real questions about, will this be successful? And they crushed their...
They hit the goal.
Their goal. They had, I think, probably close to 1,500 trips on bike, or maybe a little bit over that. I'll have to go back and look at the data, but about 1,500 trips, and we can see all the routes that people took. So now we can use that data in collaboration with our business partners in the city. So we talk about route planning and wayfinding and really trying to help better inform that infrastructure.
Wayfinding, you just threw that out there, and I'm thinking of just meetings I've gone to, city meetings where that word has come up. And I think it's still a relatively new word, but it's certainly one that getting more and more attention. The idea of directing people, and I think with the smartphones and signage and probably many other things. I don't know how many different ways there are to direct people, but how do you do that on a bike? Because it sounds like you really want to be concentrating, not. I know you're not telling people to have a smartphone in one hand and ride the handlebar with the other.
No.
We don't want that.
That's a good question, and there isn't currently. If you don't already know the grid by virtue of driving, it's really challenging for people who are visiting the city, and want to explore it on foot or on bike. It's a real challenge to get around if you don't know the landmarks and how to get there if you've never been around. So it is a huge example, or a huge gap in an example of what we could do better when we start talking about placemaking. And I'm going to throw out all the jargon words now. But
write all these down.
Yeah. What placemaking is essentially is, and it gets back to even who are we as a city? What do we value? What do we find important? What do we want to share with other people? And it's really being able to demonstrate those values and those core concepts in practice and in the physical infrastructure. And that's why wayfinding is important, because it's our opportunity to be able to point people where we want them to see and experience in Peoria. So that's why it's important. And because currently, if you don't know, it's really hard to find what we really love about this city.
I think one of the other, and of course, this is not to turn this us against them kind of thing, because I think that's way too simplistic. But you are noticing, and I think it's long overdue, that the city fathers, the officials, are now saying we don't want a city just for the automobile. And of course, Peoria, not unlike many other cities, went that route with all the parking decks and just basically setting up the whole thing for a car. Well, look at all the lanes that so you could go through really quickly. Washington Street or things like that. But there's still, and now we have bike paths, or at least more of them, lanes. You're still in competition with that car, and that's a dangerous thing when you're, even if you have a helmet.
Certainly,
you're on a bike. You're in the open air. You're not moving at the speed of the car, and sometimes the cars think they own the road.
Sure, you're right. Us against them is too simplistic, but it's easy for our brains to grasp onto, and we're wired to have this sort of tribalism, right? But what it comes down to is everybody's a human. Everybody is making a choice on how they want to navigate the city. Some people by necessity, right? So this is where it gets into why cycling matters, and it's because cycling is a tool for equity and equality. When we start talking about access to spaces in the city, some people cannot get to certain places in the city because they don't have a car, and there's no alternative way to actually get there. And so you see this sort of geographic and political segregation just by virtue of that access. So that's why it's important to have infrastructure and have a culture where everybody on the road is a human being that wants to get to their destination safely and is making a choice either by necessity or by just by being able to have that opportunity to, today I want to take my car, today I want to ride because it's nice out. But everybody's making a choice to get to their destination, and they all want to arrive safely.
I think one of the, I don't know if I would call it one of the most important documents of our time, because that sounds a little grandiose, but Walt Disney, back in the early 50s, did this, and he was probably doing a whole series of them, but a cartoon with Goofy about driving. And most of us, you're too young to have seen that. Well, I've saw it on A Wonderful World of Color back in the 60s. It wasn't new then. But the point was, and I think it's been made over and over, and now we have a term called road rage that wasn't even used at the time, I don't think, that when you get behind that wheel, you become part of the machine.
Yeah.
You talk about tribalism. My thought there is that you become one with because now you're going where you have to go. And I'm not blaming anybody that is in a great hurry, or I am if you're going too fast. But, I understand the idea that you've got a car that can move at great speed, and there's an open road, so you figure I might as well. But it's like, hey, there could be somebody crossing that street, as you say, trying to get where they're trying to go too. And we just have to get away from that car machine mentality.
Absolutely. And there's to the point a little bit earlier too about the city taking recognition of supporting cycling and beyond cycling, multimodal, so walking and everybody who uses the street.
Somebody in a wheelchair.
Yeah. It's if you can, I would highly encourage you, if you ever have an opportunity, there's some awareness events that I think Advocates for Access host and some other organizations that put you in a wheelchair and have you try to navigate some of the
Now-
infrastructure
now-
downtown. And
yeah.
it is incredibly challenging once you're put in that position, and it's incredibly eye-opening. So I'd encourage folks to give that a shot. But it's also more economically viable to build for everybody to use the roadway as opposed to just
Right.
a single use of a vehicle, because lower lifetime maintenance cost on less gray infrastructure. You have fewer emissions, all these other
Well, the
these-
great health benefits from riding a bike.
yeah, I mean it's
know.
people powered, right? It's not you're not spending money on gas. You're getting exercise. You're arguably, if you do it long enough and you stick with it, you're reducing some of your risk for end of life diseases and things of that nature, and lowering those costs that maybe aren't directly beneficial now, but into the future will save our city and our citizens more dollars. So,
And if you're not a handy guy like me, you're handy, I'm not, but you can go to those places like the Co-op,
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
right there on Main Street, and get help from people that are just volunteers like you now, and just get that bike fixed, and they teach you how to do it.
Yep.
I mean, but we're talking about basic repairs, here,
Basic
not
repairs.
necessarily revamping the whole thing.
well,
although-
we can do all of it if you
If
you
you
have
really want.
if you have the time. I mean, I have
Uh-oh.
five bikes
What
now.
have you got
so-
in your garage, Brent? Some kind
Yeah.
of crazy bike that we haven't
Yeah.
seen yet?
Yeah, I got a 5 of them. So
The one thing, speaking of bicycles, the one thing that I've never realized until, of course, we do stories here at the Journal Star, and that sort of opens your eyes. But the history of bicycles in this town is remarkable.
Yep.
I mean, it's been out there. This is not any bolt from the blue.
Mm-hmm.
This is not breaking news. But we used to have. I go by it every day where Komatsu is. That used to be Lakeview Park, I believe, where they had bike races.
The
We're
velodrome,
talking
yeah.
about 20s, maybe before the 20s, over 100 years ago. And there was a national thing. They came here from all over well, maybe the world.
It was
but,
international, yeah.
International. And that was right here in Peoria.
Yep.
So we were part of the bike circuit
we
at
were
one time.
we were the mecca for bikes at one point.
The
And
Mecca. There we go. I like that word.
for the nation and the world. We had a number of world champions that raced on that velodrome that was down there.
Oh,
so
that's amazing.
yeah.
And when I see that, the library's got some of these old pictures. I'm sure you've seen
Mm-hmm.
them being in the club. But those bicycles that with the big, what's the word? The big front wheel.
the penny farthings.
Okay, the penny
Yeah.
farthings. One would always look at those, in the old pictures. It's kind of like, how do they even get up on that?
Yeah.
Well, then you see them racing these bikes.
Oh, yeah.
They had to be assisted on it, and then they just took off. Those things moved.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and of course I wouldn't want to fall off one either.
No, it's
which
about
had probably
About
happened
a
a few
6 foot
times.
fall.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. See, so this biking thing has got a long history here in Peoria.
Yeah.
And now it's coming back, so that's good news. And maybe not with a penny farthing, but
No.
somebody's got one of those around here.
Oh yeah,
somewhere.
there's a couple in Peoria, and we are. So I want to give a shout out to the other organizations too.
Sure.
So, at Bike Peoria, we really advocate for a more bike friendly Peoria, and trying to advocate for an urban core and a city that allows people to make more trips by bike, where it's safe and enjoyable to do that. That's kind of our guiding mission. But there's the Illinois Valley Wheelmen that host a number of group rides for people that are looking to do more road riding, longer distance. They do a fantastic job. The Peoria Bicycle Club, which is, I probably should fact check this, but I think it is one of the oldest, if not the oldest, bicycle clubs in the nation.
They
It's
go
still
back
around.
to that history I
They
was
do.
talking about.
So they're still around, still active. And then there's also PAMBA, Peoria Area Mountain Biking Association,
Oh.
that they do a lot of trail maintenance at Wildlife and Farmdale, and really helping put in that sweat equity to keep all of those facilities. There's amazing mountain bike facilities in our region for a region of our size. So there's all these different groups with different sensibilities, but we all come together around making cycling more accessible for people. And we're working on next year collaborating with Adam White to build out some more cycling related stuff for the Whiskey Daddle
Good.
festival that'll be happening
Have
next
a
fall. So-
bicycle component.
yeah, some sort of either a more accessible ride for anybody who wants to, but maybe getting into some kind of novelty races to.
See, now I could see doing the 5K or something on a bike.
Yeah.
Just
a little bit
kind
easier.
of patrolling along and behind everybody.
Yeah.
Make sure there's no stragglers.
Yeah.
I can handle that. I think maybe. I don't know. We'll see. Well, Brent, just want to remind folks again, any employers out there watching or listening to this podcast, if you're at all, interested in the idea of supporting our young people in this town, here's the guy to call over at EDC. You're on the online, so you don't have to worry about, Google him, you'll find him. And that's important because you really need the buy-in of the employers, to give as you said, and some are already doing it, so you can find out what these kids can do.
Yep.
So that's great. And on the bicycle part, we'll get back to you. And as you come up with these new elements here in the community, we want to let people know about it.
Excellent.
Okay.
Yeah.
All
Thanks
right,
for having me.
So it's been our pleasure. Well, that's about it for now. I want to thank Adam Garrick, who's at the controls here today, makes this all possible. And we'll see you next time on Tarter Sauce.